Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into this Week 11 edition of my top starts and sits. Before I dive into today's video, as a reminder, these starts and sits are not only for season-long fantasy leagues. You can apply this if you do play daily fantasy lineups, and you can also apply these to your prop bets if you do like to bet overs and unders on players as well. Let's go ahead and dive into today's video. Starting at the quarterback position, my top starts of the week. If you are looking for a streaming option, one guy you can maybe turn to is Tua Tagovailoa against the Commanders. This is a game that's going to be played in Spain. It will be kicking off Sunday morning at 9:30 Eastern. The reason why I like this matchup, he's going against a very bad defense that has lost multiple players on all three levels of the ball. The Commanders have allowed the second most points per game against the quarterback position. When you look at their last four games, all four quarterbacks that they faced finished over 260 passing yards, and they also gave up 13 passing touchdowns a game. That is over 3 touchdowns a game over their last four outings. So I do like the chances that Tua is going to finish anywhere between 240 to 260 plus passing yards and get you at least 2 or 3 touchdowns to kick off week 11 on Sunday morning. My other top start, a guy that's struggled over the past couple weeks, but I'm looking for a bounce back performance from Jordan Love and their head coach, LaFleur. After all this talk this week, I'm kind of looking for a similar outing, even though they let down last week of the Steelers, right? Remember, there was like, oh, is this Steelers team going to work out with Tomlin? Then they blew out the Colts. Their offense looked great. I'm looking for a bounce back type of performance with all the chatter that's surrounding the Packers, and which is why I do like Love. But he also does have a very good matchup he can take advantage of, going against a Giants defense who are tied for the fourth most allowed points per game against the quarterback position. When you look at their last four games, three of the quarterbacks that they face have finished at least over 220 passing yards, and they've also given up 9 passing touchdowns in those four games. So that's just over 2 touchdowns a game. So I like the chances that Love's going to cross the 220 passing yard mark and get you 2 or 3 touchdowns this weekend. Moving into my top sits. My top sit of the week, I am going to suggest sitting Baker Mayfield against the Bills. The Bucks offense has struggled as of late. They have not been as consistent as we've seen earlier in this season. I think those injuries have finally taken a toll, especially on their passing attack, missing Mike Evans. But with that being said, it's just a rough matchup when you look at it on paper. They're going against a Bills defense that have allowed the fourth fewest points per game against the quarterback position. When you look at the last four games from the Bills, only two of the quarterbacks that they faced finished over 175 passing yards, and in those games they've also only given up 3 passing touchdowns. So this is more likely going to be a floor outcome for Mayfield, which is why I'd be turning to other options. My other sit, even though he's having a very strong first season for Seattle, is I'm going to suggest to sit Sam Darnold against the Rams. Rams are tied for the 8th fewest points per game against the quarterback position. When you look at their last four games, only two of those quarterbacks crossed over 180 passing yards against their defense. Now they did give up 5 passing touchdowns in those games, but that's still less than 2 touchdowns a game. So Darnold, I could see finishing around maybe 200 passing yards, and then you just hope that he can get you a couple touchdowns if you end up leaving him in your lineup. But I would definitely be looking for other options if you do have them available in your league. Moving into my top starts and sits at the running back position, my top start of the week is going to be Jaylen Warren against the Bengals. The Bengals, first of all, they have allowed the most points per game against the running back position. When these two teams faced off about, 3 or 4 weeks ago, in that game, Jaylen Warren had 127 rushing yards. He also had 4 receptions for 31 yards in that game. So I'm hoping that he will be able to repeat that performance. And then when you look at the last 4 games from the Cincinnati defense, 5 different running backs in those 4 games finished over 105 total yards, and they also gave up 5 running back touchdowns as well. Moving into my other start that I do like, and apparently we got the cop sirens going off outside my window, so I do apologize about that. With that being said, my other top star, I'm going to go with the rookie running back, Woody Marks against the Titans. Now, I will say there are some injuries to running back positions. Maybe you lost a running back. If you do need to roll the dice on a Nick Chubb, I would maybe consider that, maybe as a flex play. But when you do, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, these starts and sits, you can also qualify for your daily lineups. So Nick Chubb also might be a cheaper daily option you can consider. But with that being said, I do like Woody Marks against the Titans. Titans have allowed the second most points per game against the running back position. When you look at the last 4 games for the Titans, three different running backs finished with at least over 85 total yards against them, and they have also given up 5 running back touchdowns in those 4 games as well. Moving into my sits, my top sits of the week, I'm going to suggest sitting the pair of running backs for Seattle as well, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet against the Rams. Rams have allowed the fewest points per game against running backs this year. When you look at the last 4 games from the Rams, only one running back finished over 45 rushing yards, which doesn't really bode well when you consider that Walker and Charbonnet split the touches out of the backfield. And then why I really don't like them is just running backs have not scored touchdowns against the running backs have not scored touchdowns against the Rams defense this season. When you look at the last 4 games, only one running back touchdown was allowed. But then when you look at the entire season, the Rams have only given up 2 running back touchdowns this year. And then moving into my other top sit, I am going to suggest sitting Tyrone Tracy Jr. against the Packers. Packers have allowed the 5th fewest points per game against the running back position. Now, when you look at their last 4 games, only one running back finished over 65 rushing yards against their defense. When you look at in those 4 games, only 2 running back touchdowns have been given up in those games. But another thing is not only they're not giving up the touchdowns as of late, only with the 2, the Packers have only given up 4 running back touchdowns for the entire season. Moving into my top starts and sits at the wide receiver position, I like Tua, so I'm going to like his top option in the passing attack in Miami. So I like Jalen Waddle against the Commanders. Commanders have allowed the second most points per game against wide receivers this year. When you look at the Commanders' last 4 games, 5 different wide receivers finished over 80 receiving yards in those games, and they've also given up 7 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. That's almost 2 wide receiver touchdowns a game. Apparently we got something going on because that's the second time we've heard some sirens outside my window. So that's coming over on my video. Again, I do apologize about that. But yeah, moving into my other top start, I like Jordan Addison against the Bears. The Bears have allowed the 3rd most points per game against the wide receiver position this year. When you look at the Bears' last 4 games, 4 different wide receivers finished over 85 receiving yards, and they've also given up 5 wide receiver touchdowns in those games as well. Moving into my sits, these are receivers that are going to be featured in the same game. But I'm going to suggest sitting Xavier Worthy against the Broncos. I think you can roll the dice on Rashee Rice just because he's going to get a high volume of touches. But maybe Rashee Rice might get a floor play because this is a tough matchup on paper. But because when you look at this matchup for Xavier Worthy against the Broncos have allowed the fewest points per game against the wide receiver position. When you look at their last 4 games, only one wide receiver finished over 80 receiving yards against Denver in those 4 games. So if there's going to be one KC wide receiver that goes over 80 yards, it's probably going to be Rashee Rice. And then why I really don't like him is just because they have been very good at keeping wide receivers out of the end zone this season. In their last 4 games, only one wide receiver touchdown has been given up. But then when you look at the entire season, the Broncos have only allowed 2 wide receiver touchdowns this entire year so far. So moving into the other sticking in this matchup, it's going to be Courtland Sutton and Troy Franklin against the Chiefs. The Chiefs have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game against the wide receiver position. When you look at their last 4 games, only one wide receiver finished over 65 receiving yards against Kansas City. And in those 4 games, they only gave up 2 wide receiver touchdowns. So that's why I don't like the pair of wide receivers for Denver as well. And then moving in to wrap this up, my top starts and sits at the tight end position. My top start, I am going to suggest the rookie tight end for Chicago, Colston Loveland against the Vikings. The Vikings are tied for the 8th most points per game allowed against tight ends this year. Now, when you look at their last 4 games, they have let 2 different tight ends finish over 75 receiving yards, and they've also given up 3 tight end touchdowns. So I'm looking for Loveland to get anywhere between 40 to 70 receiving yards and at least least a touchdown this weekend. My other start, this will be in the game tomorrow night with the Patriots and Jets. I know he's always been a kind of a high floor streaming option if you need somebody, but there's a potential for Hunter Henry to have a ceiling performance against the Jets. The Jets have allowed the 9th most points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at their last 4 games, 3 different tight ends finished over 40 receiving yards, and they've also given up 2 tight end touchdowns in those games as well. And then moving into my sits, even though I did love him as a waiver wire target, and I still do think if you need a tight end this week, you can maybe bet on the volume of targets that he's been getting as of late. But if you can, I would turn to other options this week, which is why I don't like Cade Otton against the Bills. Bills have allowed the fewest points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at their last 4 games, they've only let 1 tight end finish over 40 receiving yards. And then the biggest reason why is sometimes all you want out of your tight end is just to get you a touchdown to have a strong performance. The Bills have only given up 1 tight end touchdown for the entire season. My other sit, this is kind of the same thing. The Raiders haven't allowed a lot of tight end touchdowns, so I am suggesting to sit the Jake Ferguson against the Raiders. Raiders have allowed the 5th fewest points per game against tight ends this year. Now, in their last 4 games, there have been 2 tight ends that finished over 40 receiving yards, so maybe there's a potential for Ferguson to get some yards this week. But with that being said, they have been very good at keeping tight ends out of end zones, out of the end zone this year. The Raiders have only given up two tight end touchdowns for the entire season. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits for week 11 of this NFL season. As always, if you did enjoy today's video, hit that like button. If you have not hit subscribe yet on the YouTube, please make sure you do that. And as always, you can always follow me on my other social media platforms. I'm at Cody Talks NFL. You can find me on X. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram as well. Wish you guys all the luck as we make this final push for the playoffs. I'll talk to you next week. Peace out.